The blindfold was still tied behind my head when I felt her lips press against mine. No warning, no countdown. Just Harper's hand flat against my chest, holding me still, and her mouth finding mine in the dark like she'd rehearsed it 100 times in her head before she ever let herself do it once in real life. I froze. Every spoon, every plate, every ounce of the tasting menu I'd spent 3 weeks building disappeared from my mind at once. When she finally pulled back, she leaned close to my ear, so close I could feel her breath on my skin, and she whispered 4 words that turned my entire kitchen upside down. "Guess what, Mason?" I reached up and tore the blindfold off, and the first thing I saw was her face, flushed, terrified and waiting. Waiting to see if I was about to ruin 7 years of friendship, or finally understand what she'd been trying to tell me the whole time. To understand how we got to that kitchen, that blindfold, that whispered sentence, you need to go back further than that night. You need to go back to the beginning, because nothing about what happened between us was sudden. It only looked that way from the outside. My name is Mason Wheeler. I'm 35 years old, and I own a small farm-to-table restaurant in Charleston, South Carolina, tucked into a converted cotton warehouse 2 blocks off the water. 12 tables, an open kitchen, the kind of place where regulars know which server to ask for and which nights the fish is best. I built that restaurant with my own hands, and I built it after my marriage fell apart because cooking was the only thing that made sense to me when everything else stopped making sense at all. I was married to a woman named Claire for 5 years. It didn't end with screaming or slammed doors. It ended the way a lot of marriages end. Quietly, over dinners neither of us finished, in silences that used to be comfortable and slowly turned cold. Claire wanted a husband who left the kitchen behind at 5 o'clock. I wanted a life built around the thing that made me feel most like myself. We tried to meet in the middle for a long time, and in the end, there was no middle left to meet in. She moved to Raleigh. I stayed in Charleston and threw every hour I had left into the restaurant, because a stove doesn't ask you to be someone you're not. Harper Lane walked into my life 2 years before Claire ever walked out of it. We met in culinary school. Both of us broke, both of us running on drip coffee and stubbornness. She was the only student in our class who could taste a sauce once and tell you exactly what it was missing. I remember the first time I watched her do it. Some overconfident guy had made a béarnaise that broke halfway through service, and Harper tasted it, wrinkled her nose and said, "You rushed the butter. You always rush the things that need patience." She wasn't talking about sauce. Not really. I understood that even then, and I filed it away somewhere I didn't look at very often. We became the kind of friends who don't need an occasion. She was in my wedding, standing 3 feet from Claire in a pale yellow dress, smiling the whole ceremony like it cost her nothing. I found out years later exactly what it cost her. She never told me. She just kept showing up. After the divorce, Harper became the person who called without an excuse. Not to check on me, never phrased that way. She'd say she was in the neighborhood, or she needed a second opinion on a menu, or she just felt like eating. She'd show up at the restaurant an hour before close, sit at the far end of the bar with a glass of red wine she barely touched, and wait for me to finish the last ticket so we could talk. Some nights we talked about nothing. Some nights we didn't talk at all, and that silence never once felt empty the way silence with Claire used to. I didn't notice the pattern building underneath all of it. That's the part I regret the most, looking back now. I didn't notice, because noticing would have meant asking myself a question I wasn't ready to answer. Harper remembered that I drank my espresso with exactly 1 sugar cube, never 2, and she'd drop one into my cup before I even reached the machine. She remembered the name of the boat my grandfather used to take me fishing on, a detail I mentioned once, years earlier, in passing, half asleep after a double shift. She brought it up again on a random Tuesday like it had been sitting in her chest the whole time, waiting for the right moment to surface. Nobody holds on to details like that by accident. I know that now. I didn't let myself know it then. She started leaving small things at the restaurant. A sprig of rosemary tucked behind my ear when I was too deep in prep to notice her walk in. A handwritten note stuck to the walk-in door that just said, "The lamb needs 5 more minutes of rest, trust me." She was always right. I started trusting her instincts more than my own, in the kitchen and everywhere else, and I told myself that was just professional respect. It wasn't only that. I know that now too. Harper had a habit, back then, of showing up with something in her hands, never empty-handed, always some small excuse dressed up as a reason. A jar of fig preserves she said she'd made too much of. A second-hand knife she found at a flea market on King Street that she swore looked exactly like something I'd love, and she was right. It became my favorite paring knife within a week. She never once said she just wanted to see me. She always gave the visit a job to do first, and I let her, because I think some part of me understood that if I ever called it what it was, I'd have to decide what to do about it, and I wasn't ready for that decision yet. There was a night, maybe 8 months before the Blindfold, when a bad storm rolled in off the coast and knocked the power out across half of downtown Charleston. I was still at the restaurant, boxing up food that wouldn't survive the outage, when Harper showed up soaked to the skin, holding 2 flashlights and a bag of candles she'd bought at the corner store. We sat on overturned crates in the dark dining room and ate cold shrimp and grits by candlelight, laughing about nothing, and at some point her hand landed on my knee and stayed there for 3 full seconds before she pulled it back like she'd touched a hot pan. Neither of us said a word about it. I lay awake that night measuring the exact weight of those 3 seconds, and I still couldn't tell you what I decided they meant. If you're watching this and you've ever had a friend who felt like more before you were brave enough to admit it, I want you to sit with that feeling for a second, because it matters for what comes next. Harper had her own history, one she didn't talk about often. 2 years before that storm, she'd been engaged to a man named Trevor Ashcroft, a hedge fund guy from Atlanta who wore the kind of watch that costs more than my restaurant's monthly rent. Trevor liked Harper the way a man likes a painting he's proud to own. He didn't like Harper the way a man likes a person he actually sees. She called off the engagement 3 weeks before the wedding, and when I asked her why, all those months ago, she just said, "He never once asked what I was thinking. He only ever asked what I thought of him." I didn't understand the weight of that sentence at the time. I understand it completely now. For a long stretch, our friendship stayed exactly where it had always been. Close, easy. A little too easy if I'm honest. And then Claire came back into the picture, and everything started to shift. Claire called me on a Thursday evening, out of nowhere, her voice doing that soft, careful thing it used to do right before she wanted something. She said she was back in Charleston for a work project and wanted to grab dinner, for old time's sake, nothing more. I should have said no. I told myself one dinner wouldn't matter. I was wrong about that, and it cost me more than I expected. We met at a quiet place near the Battery, and within 20 minutes Claire was telling me Rally hadn't worked out the way she'd planned, that the job was fine, but nothing in her life felt like it belonged to her anymore, that she'd been thinking about me more than she wanted to admit. I told her gently but clearly that we weren't going back there. She smiled the way she used to smile right before she said something designed to leave a mark, and she said, "You've got someone else already, don't you? That girl from culinary school, the one who's always hanging around your kitchen." I didn't answer fast enough, and my silence told her everything she needed to know. Claire had always been good at reading a room before she ever walked into it, and I think she knew exactly what she was walking into before she picked up the phone to call me that Thursday. She'd never once asked about Harper during our marriage, not directly, but she used to make these small, offhand comments, the kind that sound like nothing until you replay them years later. "Your little sous chef friend sure spends a lot of time here for someone who isn't on the payroll," she said once, at a Christmas party, laughing like it was a joke. I laughed along with her back then. I don't laugh at that memory anymore. 2 days later, Claire showed up at the restaurant during the Saturday rush. She didn't come to eat. She came to be seen. She sat at the bar in a red dress, ordered a glass of wine she barely touched, and watched the kitchen through the pass like she was auditing it. Harper was there that night, plating desserts, and when she noticed Claire sitting there, watching me, watching us, something in her face closed like a door being pulled shut from the inside. Claire waited until closing, until most of the staff had gone home, and then she walked up to Harper at the bar and said, loud enough for half the room to hear, "You've been in love with him this whole time, haven't you? Every single dinner, every phone call, every time you dropped everything to come sit in his kitchen. I saw it years ago. I just didn't think you'd be pathetic enough to still be circling after the divorce." The room went quiet. Harper didn't cry, and she didn't argue. She set her wineglass down very carefully, looked at Claire for a long moment, and said, "At least I never once needed him to become someone he wasn't in order to love him." Then she walked out the back door without looking at me, and I stood there holding a stack of dirty plates, feeling like the ground had shifted under a kitchen I'd built with my own 2 hands. I didn't hear from Harper for 4 days after that. 4 days of silence from the one person who never went silent on me. I texted twice. No response. I called once. It went straight to voicemail. On the fifth day, I closed the restaurant early, drove to her apartment near the market, and stood outside her door for almost 10 minutes before I finally knocked. She opened the door in an old sweatshirt, hair pulled back, eyes tired in a way I'd never seen on her before. "You didn't have to come," she said. I told her I did. She let me in, and we sat on opposite ends of her couch, 3 feet of space between us that felt like 300 miles. "Was she right?" I asked, about what she said. Harper was quiet for a long time, long enough that I heard the refrigerator hum in the kitchen behind her. Then she said, very softly, "Does it matter if she was right? If you never once looked at me and wondered the same thing?" I didn't have an answer for that. I wanted to. I just didn't have one ready, and my silence hurt her more than any wrong answer could have. She asked me to leave that night, not angry, just tired, the kind of tired that comes from carrying something heavy and alone for years. I left. I drove home with my hands too tight on the wheel. And for the first time since my divorce, my apartment felt unbearably quiet. I sat on my own couch that night for a long time, not turning on the television, not reaching for my phone, just sitting with the sound of nothing. I thought about every dinner Harper had ever shown up to uninvited, every note left on the walk-in door, every small kindness I had folded neatly into the category of friendship because it was easier than asking what it actually was. I thought about the 3 seconds her hand had stayed on my knee during the storm, and how I had spent that entire night measuring the weight of it, instead of simply asking her what it meant. I understood, sitting there in the dark, that I had spent years standing at the edge of something enormous, close enough to feel the warmth of it, never quite brave enough to step all the way in. If you've ever realized too late that the most important person in your life had been standing right in front of you the whole time, waiting for you to notice, put a comment below and tell me when that moment hit you. I read every single one, and I want to know your story too. For 3 weeks after that, Harper and I barely spoke. She stopped coming by the restaurant. No candlelit dinners during power outages, no notes on the walk-in door, no espresso with exactly 1 sugar cube waiting for me before I even asked. The kitchen felt different without her presence at the edge of it, and I finally understood, 3 weeks too late, that the silence I used to think of as peace was actually just the absence of her. I threw myself into work the way I always did when something in my chest felt too big to sit with. I was developing a new tasting menu for the restaurant's anniversary, a series of dishes built entirely around low-country ingredients, and I couldn't get a single one of them to land right. Something was missing from every plate, and I think, somewhere underneath the professional frustration, I already knew exactly what it was. Owen, my sous chef, a guy who'd worked beside me for 6 years and saw more than he ever said out loud, finally put down his knife one slow Tuesday afternoon and looked at me across the prep table. "Chef," he said, "you've replated that scallop dish 9 times this week. It's not the scallops." I told him to mind his station. He just shook his head and went back to work. But he wasn't wrong, and we both knew it. It was Owen, actually, who gave me the idea that started everything. He mentioned that Harper had always had the sharpest palate of anyone he'd ever worked beside, and that if I really wanted honest feedback on the anniversary menu, I should ask her to taste it blind, no visual bias, just pure flavor. I sat with that idea for 2 days before I worked up the nerve to text her. I kept the message simple. I told her I was struggling with the anniversary menu, that nobody's opinion mattered to me the way hers did, and that I understood if she said no. I told her I missed her, plainly, without decoration, the way I tell most truths. 3 hours later, she replied with 1 word. "Okay." She came to the restaurant on a quiet Monday night after service, after the last table had cleared out and the staff had gone home. It was just the 2 of us, and the low hum of the kitchen lights. She was wearing jeans and an old Charleston Culinary Institute sweatshirt, the same one from years ago, soft at the collar from a decade of washing. She looked nervous in a way I'd rarely seen from her, and I understood, standing there, that this dinner wasn't really about the menu at all. Not for either of us. We didn't talk about Claire. We didn't talk about the 4 days of silence, or the 3 weeks after that. We just fell back into the rhythm we'd always had, her leaning against the counter while I worked, me handing her a spoon before she even asked for one. It felt like breathing after holding my breath for a month. Somewhere around the 4th course, I made an offhand joke, told her I wanted her honest opinion with 0 bias, and grabbed a clean kitchen towel off the rack, holding it up and asking if she trusted me enough to go in completely blind. She looked at me for a long moment, something unreadable moving behind her eyes, and then she said, "I trust you more than I trust myself these days." I didn't understand yet how heavy that sentence really was. I tied the towel gently over her eyes, and I fed her the first bite of the scallop dish that had been giving me trouble all week. She was quiet for a moment, chewing slowly, and then she said the sauce needed acid, brightness, something to cut through the richness. She was right. She was always right. I adjusted it on the spot, fed her the second version, and watched her whole face soften into something close to a smile. We went through 3 more courses like that, her blindfolded at the pass, me feeding her small bites off a spoon, both of us laughing in a way we hadn't laughed together in weeks. And somewhere in the middle of the 5th course, something shifted in the room. The air went thick and quiet, and neither of us reached for a joke to fill it. I want you to imagine standing in a kitchen you built with your own hands, feeding the person who has quietly loved you longer than you were brave enough to admit, and finally understanding what every small gesture over 7 years had actually been trying to tell you. I asked if she was ready for the last course. She nodded, still blindfolded, hands resting on the counter in front of her. I set the spoon down. I didn't pick up another dish. Instead, I reached out and rested my hand gently over hers, and I asked her the question I should have asked weeks earlier. Harper, was Claire right? The kitchen went completely silent. She didn't answer with words. She reached up, found my face with both hands, still blindfolded, still trusting me completely in the dark, and she kissed me. That's the moment I told you about at the very beginning, the moment everything in my restaurant, in my chest, in 7 years of careful, quiet friendship, turned itself inside out. When she pulled back and whispered, "Guess what, Mason?" against my ear. I tore the blindfold off her eyes myself, because I needed to see her face when she finished that sentence. She was crying just slightly, the good kind of crying, and she said, "Guess what? I turned down the job in Nashville 3 weeks ago. The head chef position. The one I told you I was still deciding on. I decided the same night Claire said what she said. I decided I wasn't going to spend one more year of my life circling a kitchen I was afraid to walk all the way into." I stood there with a spoon still in my hand, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I didn't have a single clever thing to say. I just pulled her into me and held on. We didn't talk about what it meant right away. We didn't have to. We finished the last course together, sitting on overturned crates the way we had during the storm, feeding each other bites straight off the same fork. No blindfold this time, nothing hidden between us anymore. Claire found out about us within the month. The way small towns and small restaurant scenes always let those things travel. She sent one final text, short, almost gracious in its bitterness. "I hope she makes you happy." I couldn't. I didn't answer. There was nothing left to say to her that wouldn't have been cruel, and I was done being cruel to people who were only ever cruel to themselves in the end. Owen noticed the change before anyone else, the way people who watch you every day always do. He caught me smiling at nothing one Tuesday morning while I was breaking down a case of shrimp, and he just said, "About time, chef," and went back to his station like it was the most obvious thing in the world. It was. I just needed 7 years in a blindfold to finally see it. If you're the kind of person who's been quietly loving your best friend for longer than you've admitted out loud, drop a comment and tell me what's stopping you from saying it. I promise you, the fear of losing them is almost never as big as the fear of never trying at all. The months that followed weren't dramatic. They were small and steady, the way real things actually build. Harper started coming into the restaurant not as a visitor at the end of the bar, but as a partner in the kitchen, developing menus alongside me, tasting everything before it went out, her instincts sharpening every dish we put in front of a guest. We didn't rush anything. We'd already spent 7 years building the foundation without either of us realizing what we were building. There was nothing left to rush toward. We just had to keep walking the path that had been there the whole time. She moved into my apartment above the restaurant on a quiet Sunday in early spring. No big announcement, just a slow accumulation of small things. A coffee mug that only she used left permanently on the shelf. A stack of her cookbooks wedged between mine. Her sweatshirt hanging on the hook by the door where my chef's coat used to hang alone. The apartment stopped feeling like a place I was simply staying and started feeling like a place we actually lived. One evening, almost a year after that blindfolded taste test, I was working late on a new spring menu, and Harper walked into the kitchen holding a small black box, no fanfare, no big speech prepared, just her standing in the doorway the way she always used to stand, watching me work before I noticed her there. I looked up, and she said, "Guess what?" The same 2 words from that first night, and something in my chest went completely still. Inside the box wasn't a ring. It was a set of 2 matching wooden spoons, engraved on the handles, one with my name and one with hers. "I already know how the big question ends," she said. "I just wanted you to know I'm choosing this every single day, not just once." I proposed to her 3 weeks later, for real, on the same overturned crates from the storm, holding an actual ring this time, and she said yes before I even finished the sentence. Now, if you're watching this tonight, tell me down in the comments where in the world you're tuning in from, and what time it is right where you are. I love seeing how far these stories travel, and I read every single answer. Harper and I got married the following autumn. A small ceremony in the restaurant's courtyard, string lights strung between the old oak trees, 12 tables pushed together into one long one for family and friends, the same way we'd always fed the people we loved. Owen stood up during the toast and told the story of the 9 replated scalloped dishes, and the whole courtyard laughed until Harper had to wipe her eyes. These days, the restaurant has grown into 2 locations, the original warehouse space and a smaller spot near the market that Harper runs almost entirely on her own, her name on the menu right alongside mine. We still close out most nights the same way we did all those years ago. Her at the far end of the bar, me finishing the last ticket. Except now, there's no distance left between us to measure. Some evenings, when the kitchen finally goes quiet, I still tie a towel over her eyes and feed her the first bite of whatever new dish I'm working on, not because we need the excuse anymore, but because some rituals are worth keeping long after the reason for them has changed. We have a daughter now, almost 2 years old, named Rosemary, after the sprig Harper used to tuck behind my ear on busy nights before either of us admitted what we were building. She already has her mother's nose for flavor, wrinkling her face at anything too sweet, reaching for anything with real depth to it. Some evenings I catch Harper watching her the exact same way she used to watch me across a kitchen counter, quiet, patient, paying attention to every small detail like it matters, because to her, it always does. Owen made head chef of the market location last spring, and he still brings up the 9 scallop dishes every chance he gets, usually right before a big service like it's good luck. Claire, as far as I know, is doing well in Raleigh, and I mean that honestly. Time has a way of smoothing out the sharp edges of things, and whatever bitterness there was between us has mostly settled into something quieter, something closer to peace. I don't think about that Saturday night at the bar very often anymore, and when I do, it's mostly with gratitude, because without her cruelty forcing the truth into the open, I might have spent another 7 years standing at the edge of my own life, instead of walking into the middle of it. On slow Sunday mornings before the restaurant opens, Harper and I still sit on those same overturned crates in the empty dining room, coffee in hand, Rosemary running circles around the tables with a wooden spoon in her fist, like it's the most important tool in the world. Harper always says the same thing when she catches me watching them instead of drinking my coffee. "You're doing it again," she says, smiling into her mug. And I am. I don't think I'll ever stop. Looking back on everything now, I understand what I couldn't see clearly back then. Love doesn't always show up loud. Sometimes it shows up as a cup of espresso with exactly 1 sugar cube, or a rosemary sprig tucked behind your ear, or a friend who keeps showing up at the end of the bar with a glass of wine she never quite finishes. Sometimes it takes someone else, someone cruel, to say the truth out loud before you're brave enough to face it yourself. And sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is stand in a kitchen, blindfolded, trusting the person across from them completely, and whisper the truth they've been carrying for 7 quiet years. If there's someone in your life who's been quietly, patiently loving you the way Harper loved me, don't wait as long as I did to notice. 7 years is a long time to keep someone waiting at the edge of a kitchen they were always meant to walk all the way into. People ask me sometimes if I regret how long it took. 7 years of small gestures neither of us named out loud, a marriage and a divorce in between, a blindfold before either of us finally said the truth plainly. I used to think I regretted it. I don't anymore. Some things need that much patience to become real. The same way a good sauce needs time instead of rushing. The same way Harper told a nervous culinary student years ago that he'd rushed the butter, that he always rushed the things that needed patience. She was talking about more than sauce that day. She usually was. So let me ask you this before you go. Have you ever had a friendship that turned out to be love, wearing a very patient disguise? And if your best friend blindfolded you tonight and whispered, "Guess what?" against your ear, do you think you'd already know the answer, or would it catch you completely off guard? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one, and if this story found something quiet in your chest tonight, hit that like button so I know this kind of story is worth telling again. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next one, and I'll see you in the next story.